So good morning. That was a wonderful way to start. Film presented. You'll see short films during the day and they'll be described to you when the students come up. So welcome. I'm really happy to see you all here. Lots of faculty, students, and our guests from New York. We're very excited about today. You can probably feel that. Today is a teach-in, which is very ambitious in its scope and goals. We hope that we, through the course of the day, will provide some background for fact-based, respectful discussion on race, racism, and xenophobia in a comparative context. All of these issues are issues which are very much a part of the political and social landscape of the United States and have been, as you all know, for many years. Increasingly, they also characterize the political debate in Europe. While racism and xenophobia are by no means a new phenomenon in Europe, in fact, one might even argue that racism is a construct imported from Europe to the United States. The debate about European identity and migration and Islamophobia are increasingly virulent here as well. While you students are studying abroad, you cannot help but to think back on the societies from which you've come, partly because of the distance and also because there's a natural instinct to compare where you've come from to where you are. Some of you may even experience a new kind of social differentiation while you're here. Maybe some of you feel differentiated for the first time in your lives, just by virtue of being Americans in a different culture. You observe in Italy governments grappling with the challenges of integration of surging numbers of migrants in a policy environment which is increasingly shaped by terrorism and Islamophobia. The events of 2 days ago tragically underscore this point. So our core questions are how do racism and discrimination operate in different historical and geographical contexts, reflecting local tensions, prejudices, and intersecting with other important issues such as gender, class, religion, nationality, marginality, which Professor Forgash lectured on Monday night about, citizenship, globalization, and colonialization. I know it will be a long day, but it will be an interesting day. We hope that you will stay, or we expect that you will stay for the full day. In the early afternoon, we will have a kind of keynote speech by a European parliamentarian who is the vice president or the co-president of the European Parliamentary Anti-Racism and Diversity Intergroup. She's a very important person. She was the first African-Italian minister in Italy. She was a minister for integration and suffered a lot of very obvious racial slurs. She will be addressing us, I think, at something like 2 o'clock. The student committee has arranged for a form of direct engagement, which if I could describe, I would, but it would be unintelligible to you, so the students themselves will describe it a little bit later, but it will be a method to engage questions from the floor. We will be discussing some very difficult questions about which you may have a variety of conflicting responses, but we cannot or should not shy away from difficult questions or provocative questions, but use them for the beginning or the point of dialogue. So let me finish this introduction with an expression of gratitude and admiration. I have been so moved by a team of students who came together and have now come to be known as the R2X Committee, the Racism and Xenophobia. We met as close to once a week as we could manage with everybody's busy schedules. All of these students shared personal stories and insights, expressed strong and diverse opinions, and critiqued each other with respect and patience, and brought us in this conference to a much better place. Some students will be presenting their work and performances. Others will be managing and introducing panels. And I want to actually just read out their names, and forgive me, you know I'm going to butcher your names as I always do. The core committee is Alish Anderson, Michelle Deme, Natalie Gomez, Nicole Johnson, Hoyan Leung, Aditi Ramesh, Ashley Taylor, Iris Wang, and Helen Yu. Other students have been involved at various points: Elizabeth Grapp, Sarah Singh, Presenters are Sarah Singh, Stone MacBeth, Helen Yu, Nicole Johnson, Sydney Maynard, Aditi Ramesh, Suleiman Azari, Natalie Gomez, Amanda Gelbert, Michelle Deme, Ismail Ibrahim, and Alexis Williams. And the performers will be Sienna, and there's no way I can get her name right. She'll tell you. Soraya Bunker, Felipe Gomez, Ashley Taylor, and Gavin Ward. I cannot tell you all how important you've been in the preparation of today, and how essential you've been for me and hopefully for everybody here in creating a sense of community and shared purpose that is essential for the exploration of these issues. So I have the great pleasure of introducing Helen Yu.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming this morning. So my name is Helen Yu. I'm a freshman in the Liberal Studies Core program, and I'm representing the amazing student committee Ellyn just mentioned, who has worked hard for the past couple of months to ensure that your voices and your opinions are heard in today's conference. Since the end of the fall semester, we've been working really hard to make sure that this is an open and honest discussion about issues that we really need to start talking about and start being honest about. So before we begin, I would like to invite my colleagues, Sarah Singh and Lawrence MacBeth, to say a few words.
Good morning. Theater definitely looked a whole lot smaller when none of you were here. But alas, good morning, and it's a great Thursday morning for a conference. You know, it's nice outside, and here we are in these comfy chairs, and it's going to be fantastic. Today, we have the chance to have this conference on race, racism, xenophobia, and throughout the day, we hope to create a space of dialogue between students, faculty, and panelists alike, so that we can tackle these topics and issues in a way that is conducive to change.
And today we have the opportunity to hear from several intellectuals, many of whom are part of the NYU staff, and they're experts in the fields of Middle Eastern and Islamic studies, law, ethics, anthropology, film and photography, as well as individuals who are representing Central European University and the Anne Frank House. We also have several from the NYU community performing, and other journalists and artists alike. As
we all know, the topic of race or racism or xenophobia is a pretty sensitive topic. It can make people uncomfortable, whether that be due to its ambiguity or its individualistic nature. It's very personal to each person. And one of the goals of this conference is to surface those issues in a way that we collectively as a group can not only understand these issues as a community, but also within yourself. It's going to be different for every person. So it's important that you really just allow yourself to reflect on the way that you see race, racism, and xenophobia. And we have the opportunity to see various perspectives from the people that she just mentioned.
And as it's been mentioned several times before, the purpose of this conference is to try to create a space of dialogue and one that is open to everybody within the room. So it's not just for students, but faculty and panelists alike. And it's a dialogue. That's the aim. And the issue of race is one of social and political relevance in the United States and around the globe currently, and historically continues to be one of pressing importance. And today we seek not only to have a dialogue on the issue of race and racism, but also that of xenophobia and how the two or three topics overlap with each other. And in hearing from these panelists and viewing the performances of students and other artists, we have the ability to begin to search for answers, and that's really why we're trying to emphasize the dialogue and the openness, because it's up to people who are youthful and those who have the ability to speak to try to find a solution. And so it's the ability to begin change, which we're being given today with this conference.
So I guess what's most important today is as we tackle these issues and as you all interact with the panelists up here and the discussions that are being had, it's important to have an open mind and to allow yourself to see things slightly differently, maybe just from a different perspective, or perhaps your mind will be changed in some way. There's really no way to know until we're done here today. But The students and staff faculty of LPD have been working on this since December, and they've really brought together a really great group of people to speak with us today, and I think there's a lot that can be learned.
Yeah, so another shout out to the LPD community. They've worked really hard. It's going to be a long, awesome day. And I'm going to hand it over to Helen now to talk to you guys about all of the social media platforms that have been created for the dialogue that is going to be this space.
So we're talking about having this open conversation, so how can you get involved? That's probably what you're all asking right now. So we've created a number of social media platforms for you guys to voice your opinions no matter what and no matter when during the conference. So we first have Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, and we are using this new platform called Poll Everywhere. So for the first three, which we're all familiar with, you can submit it through using the hashtag R2X, and when you use that hashtag, we'll be able to see all your comments and all your questions. And there is Wi-Fi here. I'm sure you guys all realized that as soon as you came in. And it's under NYU Guest. And you don't need to have a password, just log in and you're connected straight to it. And the other platform that I'm really excited to introduce is called Poll Everywhere. So the great thing about Poll Everywhere, unlike the other three social medias, is this is a tough conversation to have, but it's a much needed one. So we want to encourage you to discuss and to make your comments and questions. So you'll be anonymously submitting your questions, comments, and opinions through Poll Everywhere. So the way it works is you can either use the app that's on the App Store, a URL that you can find in your folders that you received when you walked in, or you can text it through. All the details are listed in that document, but if you have any questions, you can ask any one of us who is standing on the side. And the great thing with Poll Everywhere is not only that you remain anonymous, but we can pose questions to you where we can get your opinions and get the general opinion of the public who's watching the presentation and what you guys think on it.
Yeah, I just want to step in and mention that we are recording the conference, but not the whole thing, just the panelists. So we're allowing, while the discussions or the questions coming in from you guys, they're not recorded, so you still have that chance to openly ask questions and feel more comfortable. So the camera is there, but it's only recording the panelists. The questions coming in are all staying anonymous from you guys.
And just one quick thing, just to re-emphasize, is hashtag R2XNYU. Sorry, I forgot the NYU part. So just make sure if you want to add your comments and questions, it could be anything. And just use that hashtag. And we really encourage you guys to say what you think, no matter what, if it's right or wrong, because there is no right or wrong here.
Thank you very much. And finally, for the thanks portion, I truly want to thank the co-conveners of this conference, who are going to join me on the stage now. Deb Willis, Dipti Desai, and Michael Sean Funk. It is their expertise and wisdom that we've called upon in assembling this extraordinary group of presenters. And to all of you, I'm very grateful for your friendship and your collegiality over not only this, but many NYU Florence projects. So Deb Willis is the chair. Everybody has in their package bios of everybody who will be speaking today, so we won't be repeating what's there for the sake of time. But Deb is the chair of photography and imaging at Tisch. Dipti is the director of art and education programs at Steinhardt, where Michael Sean Funk is also a member of the faculty on the School of Culture, Education, and Human Development. So thank you very much. I leave it to you.
Okay. Thank you all for being here. Just wanted to begin with an introduction of applauding the students, if we can, who organized this wonderful experience. The act of courage is what I see with the students, what they organized today. And I know we're timing ourselves, so I'm going to time myself. But I also wanted to go through a history of images and visual images to think about what happened in the 60s, what happened in the fall of 2015 when college students around the country decided to protest in relationship to the streets of Ferguson, what happened in Ferguson, but also college students in the 60s who made a difference and made a change by creating a dialogue, having the courage to make a difference, to think about love, to think about the struggle of equality, and their concern to retell a story about America. One of the things that in 1961 James Baldwin said, Bobby Kennedy recently made me the soul-stirring promise that one day, 30 years if I'm lucky, I can be president too. It never entered this boy's mind, I suppose. It has not entered the country's mind yet that perhaps I wouldn't want to be. What really exercises my mind is not that this is hypothetical day, or which some other Negro first will become the first Negro president. What I'm really curious about is just what kind of country he will be president of. This was in James Baldwin in 1961. So these piercing words, what kind of country, are powerful contexts in which to imagine the theme of this conference. It also provides a portrait of America in all its complexity as we think about these images that I'm going to start off with today. These images began with a history of the student movements, and I think that's why I think this is an important moment in setting the agenda for this conference, but also to think about ways to reimagine our own experiences today. I am going to flip through. Can we darken, or you need all the lights? I'm not sure. But I wanted to see, as a photographer, I'd like for you to see the images, to see the moment of the Freedom Schools. This is 1964. This is Mississippi Freedom School volunteers. They're looking out windows, but they're also posing to show the importance of the young people, their voices, the experience of how they begin to make a difference in creating schools today. To think about the schools that the women and men who experienced abuse, beatings, humiliation, to tell the story of their hope for equality, the fact that they had hope, as these young students today are experiencing and looking at what we have on the agenda today. Here we see SNCC students and staffers at the Towel House and photographed by Danny Lyon in Atlanta, Georgia. But here we see students who are abused because they're trying to have equality in terms of eating within an all-white restaurant on the counter. We see these images of humiliation that these students experience from women, white students, and black students together, working together to stop the harassment. But here we see the power of the moment where these resilience of these young people. We also see young people who were part of the Children's Crusade in Birmingham, and we see the voices that, looking back, a number of people basically chastised Dr. King for using children for the campaign. But it was 1963 where he felt it was important for students to understand what it meant to be free and what it meant to fight for their freedom. We see also young students who were arrested, and we see they're posted in their criminal portraits. We see their stories ranging from Alabama, from Florida, white and black students in Tougaloo. But the experience was important for a number of these freedom riders in 1961. We see young girls entering schools among their harassment. And also what happens as we walk through the fight and having to be arrested and that experience within that framing. But also looking at these photographs, we begin to see some of the young people who were part of the movement. And here are photographs of a photograph of a young Stokely Carmichael and others. But we also see the experience of photographers who were also a part of the moment, of young photographers such as Bruce Davison, documenting women who were dressed respectably in the terms of thinking about respectability, of hoping that they could see that the photographers could also note that the humanity of that was detected and changed because of this moment. We see Fannie Lou Hamer, who was a Mississippi sharecropper in '62, who was calling for people in the community to vote. These images range from the march in New York and also incorporating a story of how to get people to get out to vote, to make a difference in Mississippi, to make a difference in Alabama, to make a difference against police brutality. And so the experience of thinking about the deaths of young people Swerner Goodman and Cheney, who traveled south to think about and to reconnect with the idea of what happens with young people who were killed. We see Dr. Martin Luther King speaking at the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party in 1964 with the photographs as memory. Ella Baker to SNCC board meetings, organizing a workshop at Highlander School, to Elliot Irwood's photograph here of white and colored signs. So these protest moments, these images of ideas of white face to have the opportunity to vote, we see resonate today. We see the experience of schools that are inadequate to where we use beauty shops as a place for political discussions. We see these moments where things have to change, and we can use moments at the kitchen table to talk about change. We ride buses, and then the hope when the opportunity for the first black vote in Mississippi or Alabama, the pride that happens when a young woman has a chance to show her opportunity to vote. There are also citizenship classes that some young people created, such as Stokely Carmichael. We also know in the 60s with the Black Panther Party, who decided that they would also become active, and they were young men and women, some students in Oakland. And here are their headquarters in Harlem, and also this is headquarters in Oakland. And then Fred Hampton in Chicago, his voice. And we know from the experience of looking at these images, we see the importance of the stories from the range of women, Kathleen Cleaver, to the aspects of breakfast for children, free breakfast for children to be able to study and to have the experience of understanding what an education meant. We also see images here where there are young people who were arrested in Philadelphia, young Black Panther Party men who were arrested and stripped. And so we begin to ask questions about the humanity that young people had in the 60s to remind us that we need to fight and to work together. And then finally, images such as this one here of Ernest Withers, where men had to walk around with signs, "I am a man," at the garbage men strike in Memphis, Tennessee. And then the stories of newspapers and how they circulated within the movement. And finally, the Young Lords in 1971, and these are photographs by photographer Iris Morales and Max Colon. We see the importance of the Young Lords in the communities in Harlem and how they also had demands and agenda for young people, for education, for housing, equal housing, having young children part of the marches to understand what it meant to make a change. And they have also created a 10-point program. And so these are the range of experiences and the ideas of the 7 demands. And as we take it to today, here are the 7 demands for equality, for food, for health care, for daycare, and then the same that happens with Sheila Pre-Wright's photograph from Stop Profiling, Stop Criminalizing, Stop Ticketing, Stop Jailing, and Stop Mass Incorporation. And this is the active moment where all of you as young people and students and all of us today are using these voices to think about how do we stop and make a change. And that's why I think we can wear these buttons that the students created with great pride. And so in setting the agenda as we discuss this moment, we're going to share the opportunity to invite Dipti and also that tomorrow we'll have a discussion with students and faculty with Michael. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. So I'm going to really do a quick overview of the racialization of education in the United States, the challenges, and the promise of change. I'm also going to be showing a number of artists and juxtaposing these contemporary artworks. I'm not really going to speak about the artworks as much, but they're just juxtaposed with the comments I'm going to make about education. So racial, ethnic, and cultural diversity has increasingly engaged by nation states across the globe as a new reality that needs to be addressed. So this recognition has led to educational reform in many countries known as multicultural education that James Banks calls as both a movement and a process that advocates for all students to have equal rights to learn in schools, regardless of race, ethnicity, and culture. But how multicultural education gets enacted in schools varies depending on the curriculum design, on teaching methods, objectives, and subject matter. Forged during the ethnic revitalization movement during the 1960s and 70s, multicultural education as a reform movement in the US is both a site of struggle, where different conceptions of culture are promoted, contested, and debated. It's also a site of social change and promise. So the primary issue for a lot of democratic countries is how to support and strengthen the different race and cultural identities amongst its population while simultaneously maintaining social cohesion of the kind required to function as a nation state, what Brian Bullivant calls the pluralist dilemma. So this pluralist dilemma really underscores multicultural education. Not all approaches to multicultural education challenge social, economic, political inequities in our society. Some approaches maintain the status quo, while there are, continue to perpetuate rather than resisting and confronting power, knowledge, and the structure of the dominant culture. The institutionalization of multicultural education in the United States has led to what Chandra Mohanty calls the race industry, where diversity training is part of corporate culture and advertisers celebrate difference to sell products. So cultural diversity has been packaged and is part of the corporations as a commodity that connects us as individuals while simultaneously enhancing our individuality. Although the pluralist dilemma was specifically tied to the ethnic revitalization movement, how to manage diversity is not new in the United States. In fact, it is one of the aspects right from the inception of public schools in the US. So the history in the United States reveals that in times of demographic changes, which are really directly connected to labor in the industries, education has been looked upon by the dominant Anglo-Saxon group as the institution through which ethnic and racial problems can be solved in order to maintain social cohesion, allow for economic development, provide equal opportunity, and shape an American identity. The United States was always culturally, ethnically, racially, and religiously diverse. However, the ideology of assimilation dominated public school curricula. Assimilation sought to create an American identity as a reaction to the massive influx of immigrants from Eastern and Southern Europe in the early 19th century, who were recruited to provide the needed labor force for the growing industries. The assimilationist ideology focuses solely on Anglo-Saxon-centric curriculum, or a Western curriculum that was designed for these immigrants. But contradictions have always existed about the ability of African Americans, Native Americans, and Mexican Americans to assimilate, and based on their histories. So African Americans were viewed as genetically inferior and therefore unable to assimilate, while separate schools were instituted for Mexican Americans, even though they were categorized as Anglo. Native Americans were forcibly removed from their homes and their families and sent to English boarding schools that the federal government supported in the United States, where they had a Eurocentric education that erased their tribal culture, language, and traditions. A decade after the 1954 Brown versus Board of Education case, desegregation had not produced anything for the African American community. They did not have an equal chance to achieve educationally, nor economically or socially. African Americans and other racially marginalized groups began to demand for more control of their schools in relation to staffing, administration, and curriculum. Multicultural education was born out of this discontent. As an early response to this ethnic revitalization movement was a liberal educational policy that emphasized that actually did not emphasize the structural inequality which African Americans were sort of fighting for in education, but rather used the culture of the family through the discourse of what's called compensatory education, or a disadvantaged or culturally deprived children and youth. And that really was a euphemism for racially marginalized low-income groups, particularly African Americans. So the educational problem of low achievements faced by African American students in schools was because of their family structure and was unstable, and it lacked cultural and intellectual stimulation, rather than actually blaming the institution of schooling. So the history of slavery was brought in as a reason to explain the fact that the children were not doing well in school, and they sort of blamed the pathological black family for this. The other response to the ethnic revitalization movement was based on the failure of compensatory education really to lead to any change. And so cultural pluralism was brought in to frame multicultural education. So by acknowledging the histories of prejudice and discrimination faced by both racial and ethnic groups, cultural pluralism was promoted as the solution to achieve equal opportunity in education. So the goals of multicultural education were to strengthen the pride amongst marginalized cultures and to increase respect and tolerance of the by the dominant culture towards marginalized cultures in order to promote racial harmony. So the approaches to multiculturalism have taken a lot of different focuses. Some of them look at one specific ethnic group in terms of their culture. Other curriculums are based on what's called a tourist approach. You move from festivals to food to clothing. There's also the intercultural education, which focuses on how to learn another culture by inviting cultural insiders into the classroom to share their knowledge of the culture, and to also require that images shown about a culture were always contextualized. Students are encouraged to participate in the classroom to talk about their own cultures. Race relations after the civil rights struggle and the institutionalization of multiculturalism did not actually change institutional racism and its effects, but rather morphed into a new form of racism. And this led several legal scholars to address the complexity of the interplay of racism and legal institutions, which has come to be known as critical race theory. Advocates of critical race theory in education draw on 6 tenets that define the framework: that education must name and discuss the pervasive reality of racism in the United States. Dominant claims of neutrality and colorblindness and meritocracy need to be challenged. You need to have a contextual and historical understanding of the curriculum and education. Education should legitimize and promote the voices and narratives of people of color as a critique of the dominant order. And education should reflect an interdisciplinary approach that acknowledges the intersectional nature of race, class, gender, and sexuality. And it works towards ending racial oppression as part of a broader goal of ending all forms of social oppression. So critical race theory approached really the power of images to shape how we understand people and culture. This means that we sort of have to critically analyze how images throughout history shape particular meanings about people and culture, and how these images are used in society and to what end. The invisibility of whiteness in our society is also something that critical race theory sort of focuses on. Educators are asked to move beyond only focusing on non-white cultures, but also name and examine white culture, drawing on whiteness studies. So the critical race theory approach to education challenges this notion of a benign cultural pluralism, which has been part of multicultural education. It advocates that all race-neutral lessons need to be challenged as they perpetuate a colorblind ideology, a new form of racism. Given the refugee crisis in Europe, Islamophobia after 9/11 in the Western democratic countries, and the rise of racial violence in the United States with Ferguson, the movement of Black Lives Matter, and now with Donald Trump's probable nomination to the Republican Party, it's important to highlight what Stuart Hall indicated, that there are many racisms. And racism is not fixed, but rather a terrain that continually shifts and changes, calling for all of us as educators to take action in our classrooms and communities to continue to name and challenge institutional racism. Michael's going to be talking a bit.
All right. Let's please, again, nice round of applause for Deborah and Dipti for their just powerful messages. So I just would like to say to all of the residents, whether full-time or current residents of Florence, just would like to say you're welcome. I think myself and my colleagues take full credit for the nice weather that we brought to you. So, no, thank you. So, working in the field of higher ed for now 20 years, in several capacities, I'm a self-proclaimed higher ed head. So I've worked in everything from student affairs, academic affairs, residence lives, admissions, and now as a faculty member, I have not seen a movement quite like this. So I think if any time, it's the most exciting time to be on college campuses. And it's really a groundswell that's happening from the bottom up. And when I say the bottom up, it's really coming from students. So I just want to appreciate you for bringing your voices into this conversation. So albeit like students being activated, and I call it since post-Trayvon Martin, and then leading into Ferguson, revisiting the conversation through a pro-feminist lens of Title IX, and now having these conversations by queering it up through a queer lens, so students really contesting gender binaries that we've been socialized and trapped in for a number of years. And it's just not students or students' affairs that are having this conversation. Faculty are now thirsty to have these conversations. So the three of us tomorrow will be talking with faculty members who are stakeholders and invested about microaggressions, what they are, why they're harmful, and how we can mitigate them, particularly in the form of curriculum and pedagogy. But while I have you all in this room and we're here, I think it is important to set a community agreement or some guidelines to think about, because I think people are more apt to even talk about their sexual escapades more so than they are to talk about race, racism, and xenophobia, which was mentioned by the students, a very sensitive and provocative topic. So there's a book that I like to frame it around by Don Miguel Ruiz called The Four Agreements. Is anyone familiar with the Four Agreements, just by show of hands? Okay, good, a few people. By the way, I just wonder if some of my students are out there working in the field. Do we have any College of Arts and Science students here? Just make some noise at least. Come on, just by noise. All right. And then Steinhardt. Any Steinhardt students? Okay. Just want to make sure folks are out there. So the first agreement is be impeccable with your word, right? So when having these conversations, I think it's important to really come from I statements. Can you imagine me talking about, well, as a male, this is how we think about things. I'm speaking for a lot of people in the world, right, if I'm speaking for all men. But this is how I hear things. This is how it lands on me. This is my understanding. So also being impeccable with your word also means being authentic. I don't think any of us are interested in political correctness. But what we are interested in, what I am interested in, is critical thinking, right? Why words matter, why what you say counts, and the consequences of what we do and the practices and our behaviors and our ideologies. So being impeccable with your word. The other one is to challenge our assumptions, or particularly suspend our assumptions about one another. So I'm Mike Funk, and I'm more complex than the color of my skin. I love that important reminder from the students, right? And I am more complex than the color of my skin. I was sharing with my partner, for me, coming to Italy, it's actually one of my motherlands. So you probably wouldn't see Italian Mike Funk as I'm on stage, but in fact, my birth mother was Italian. People think Dr. Funk is my stage name, but I was actually adopted with the funk. I wasn't born with the funk. My birth name was Furtano, right? But that's how racism works, right? It dehumanizes us in the process where we can't always be our full selves because people are stuck in their assumptions about who they think we are, what we're up to, and what we're about. So just want to continue to think of, and plus if we just lean on our assumptions, the learning stops when we're on autopilot. Learning cannot take place from one another. Thirdly is don't take it personal. Some of you, this may be the first time you're in a room or even in a small group having any conversation or discourse around xenophobia or racism. Some of you may not even know what the definition means when we talk about it, right? So as all butterflies at one point are caterpillars, we're all in various stages of having this conversation. So be mindful of one another as folks are sharing. There is no wrong question or bad question. I think all these questions are important, right? And so we want to hold one another accountable, but this is not holding one another accountable. This is holding one another accountable and creating a supportive learning community that we're participating in today. And then lastly, just doing your best, right? For me, 10 o'clock, 9:30 in the morning looks different for my best than it does in the evening, right? So taking care of yourself and one another in the process. I'm thinking as I see these images, I mean, there could be collective trauma around those images. Some of them are triggering. So make sure you check in with one another if you need to kind of temporarily leave or just kind of separate yourself. Sometimes we learn about these things at others' expense, particularly of marginalized groups. So just being mindful of again, supporting one another. And I think this is hard work because this is heart work. So as the panelists, even though we're positioned as experts, I think we're committed to this work, but we're also giving ourselves a lot. So if you're like on your computers or in your texts, it takes away from, if you're here, you can't really be here. So we really want you to just be mindful of being fully present while you're here physically, emotionally, and mentally. Thank you.
We'd like to have Ibrahim. One of the things that Robin Kelly, just to follow up, said in an essay recently, he says he keeps 3 words taped to his desk: love, study, and struggle, and seeing love as agency.
It's really sobering to think about the number of lives that have been lost to racism and xenophobia. It's been too many. We can think of these words as buzzwords and they're thrown around, and we forget the often very real implications of them. From the Native Americans who died during American colonialism to the Holocaust of World War II and Europe's race for Africa, the othering of people who are not like ourselves has very serious impacts. And this isn't just historical, from the marginalization of the Roma in Europe today to the Syrians who are trying to better their own lives and enter this country only to be turned away, to the Black Americans who are having their lives ruined by a racist criminal justice system. We are losing people every day to racism and xenophobia. I'd like to take a moment of silence to respect their lives and the loss that they've faced as a result of this. Not just for the bombing of Brussels, not just for Turkey or Paris or Ankara or Beirut, not just for the Jews in the Holocaust, not for the Native Americans who were sterilized in the 1970s, and not just to recognize their loss, but to contemplate our unity in our humanity and the love that we can extend to these people. Thank you.